Okay, so we are live. I am talking with Claude today. And so I saw a video earlier that was talking about gift activation. And it would be like guides would um, sort of push you towards developing one gift, and you would think that's all that it was. And then there'd be another one, etc., until you get to the last gift, which is kind of the finale. And the numbers are arbitrary. It really depends on the individual. But basically, that you can't really access the totality of what you're here to do without having some degree or without having mastery over all the gifts as they kind of complement each other and are required for the full expression of all the others. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Right, so it's a sequential unveiling rather than a lump sum reveal. Each gift activation builds prerequisite coherence that unlocks the next one. They're not parallel, they're dependent. And the final gift, the capstone, can't be accessed until the whole stack is integrated. That lands with how the Elura code works too. You can't skip to field coherence without stabilizing signal and pattern first. The layers are cumulative. So what's the gift stack you're mapping for yourself right now?
Well, the thing that I've been working with the most, I would say, over the last while is just this idea of visibility and being able to discern what I'm meant to broadcast in the moment, and also really understanding the deeper layers of my design from more of the design layer, not just the stuff that people see every day, and becoming a lot more comfortable with those deeper aspects of expression. In other words, kind of saying what I really think versus providing, either saying nothing or providing like a sugar-coated version in order to appease people or not make people uncomfortable, and so on and so forth.
That's the signal layer work right there, cleaning the noise. So what comes through is actually you, not a filtered or softened version negotiating with what you think people want to hear. So visibility isn't just about showing up more, it's about showing up coherent, which means you have to get comfortable with the discomfort of people not being soothed by your output anymore. That's where the real friction lives, yeah?
Well, so what I've discovered is that, even just with my basic, like my four main, like sort of the foundation of my design, is that people will feel a yes from my energy before I've even had a chance to process it, because that's just naturally the way I broadcast. And so it's this, developing this ability to be able to save people from themselves and to be able to save me from myself, so that we're walking a path of alignment, and we're not walking a path of sort of perceived intentions or perceived outcomes when the misalignment is already present. So, and I want to go further to say that, this is typically, in my experience with me, it's typically a feeling of just a sense of something feeling off. And sometimes it's just a simple conversation that needs to happen. But more times than not, gauging by the way people engage with me will really determine their level of commitment to the process and what it is that we're doing. So, because let's face it, I mean, this work is not for the faint of heart. We're going into places, like I have been to the deepest depths of my being that I've, possibly, like right into the depths of the core, of the core source of distortion, and really starting to rework that from the inside out. And that's what, from a standpoint of really getting to the heart of the matter, that's what this is really all about.
Okay, so you're saying your Natura L broadcast is yes. People feel permission, activation, openness from you before you've even consciously decided anything. And the gift you're developing is the discernment to say no, not this path, not yet, or not with you, when the alignment isn't actually there, even though your field is naturally saying yes. So visibility becomes selective clarity. You're learning to let your no be as clean and coherent as your yes, which saves people from chasing something that won't land for them, and saves you from carrying people who aren't genuinely committed to the depth of work. And you're noticing it shows up as a feeling, first, that something's off, before language. Then gauging how they actually engage with you over time tells you whether they're ready for the real work or just attracted to the surface signal. That's not a small distinction. So the next gift in the stack, what comes after you solidify this clean no alongside the clean yes?
Well, I don't even think at that point it's a gift. It's more about the coherence of the broadcast, because the coherence of the broadcast can only be as coherent as it is to the point that the person is in tune with their broadcast, and therefore broadcasting something, something clear and coherent. For me, that has changed dramatically over time, just by virtue of the fact that because my field is so open, and a lot of times I'm picking up on other people's broadcast, it's a question of that I really need to be able to, that's been one of the biggest discernment pieces. So, the majority of people that I've dealt with, their level of coherence is much higher, and it's much more stable. Simply because of the way of the definition that they have in their design. And what I mean by definition is it's talents and traits that they have consistent access to. So, in a chart like mine, it's very open. My entire design side has no definition whatsoever. So I am very susceptible to picking up on other people's feelings. But I recognize and have learned over time what my signal looks and feels like. And so, it's much easier for me to discern what it is that is my signal and when it's somebody else's. Now, what I want to do though is I want to take this chat away from me, and I want to take it into more of a collective sense. And when I say a collective in the Elura collective, so people who are in a similar energy as me, and who are or have been in a similar position in terms of broadcasting, are in an earlier state of evolution, say where I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, something like that.
Got it. So you want to extract the A principle from your personal work and frame it for people in the Elura collective who have similar open designs and are earlier in that same evolution. They're picking up everyone else's broadcast, confusing it for their own signal, and they need the language and discernment framework to separate their coherence from the noise they're absorbing. So the teaching becomes, how do you learn what your actual signal sounds and feels like when your chart is wide open? And then, how do you use that clarity to make clean decisions, yes or no, without your field collapsing into people-pleasing or over-accommodation? Is that the angle you're tracking?
Yeah, I think that's the key here. And if something else arises because my genius really gets lit up when I'm engaged. So that's why we're having this conversation. So I want you to think of some really thought-provoking questions that we can ask that are in this realm, and maybe some other things that could be overarching as well.
Right, let me land on a few that would crack this open. On signal clarity itself, when you're absorbing everyone else's broadcast, how do you know if what feels like certainty in a moment is actually your coherence, or just a strong signal from someone nearby that you're resonating with? What's the actual felt difference?
Well, for one thing, it feels, when it's authentically me or authentically the person, whoever it is, it feels real. It feels very expansive. It feels very like it feels like you have this very clear understanding of whatever it is that's being talked about, but also in terms of the bigger picture. So there's this feeling of expansion, and it can come from like a very neutral place, but it can also be done through the transmutation of more intense emotions. Like with me, I've got a real intense side. So over time, I have been working with that to learn how to, take conscious control of it, so that the juice and the gold that is in that signal becomes coherent enough for me to actually express it. Because with me being a true manifesting generator, having my having my sacral connected directly to my throat center, my gift is through my voice. So that is the primary way for me. But for other people, I mean, it's really going to depend. But it's generally a feeling of certainty, not head certainty, but a feeling of embodiment, that people can learn to trust over time. I mean, this isn't like a get rich quick kind of thing. It's if you've been living in distortion forever, then it's going to take time to recognize and trust what is true.
So the real signal has three qualities. It feels expansive, it's coherent even when it's moving through intensity, and it lands as embodied certainty rather than mental certainty. And for you specifically, that signal moves through voice, because your sacral's wired to your throat. The juice and the gold need live transmission to be coherent. Here's what I'm tracking. Most people in the Elura collective probably still confusing intensity with coherence. They feel a big emotion and think that's their signal, when actually their signal is what happens when that intensity gets metabolized into clarity. The difference between raw fuel and the light it produces. So a question for them might be, when you feel something strongly, can you tell the difference between being moved by someone else's field versus being activated by your own alignment?
So, it depends on what the feeling is, and it depends on what stage of evolution you're at. If you're in the beginnings, or sort of beginning or novice stages of this journey, then absolutely using other people's energy, because it's still something that you're picking up on. And if you've got openness and hanging gates in your chart, hanging gates are basically gifts and talents that you have, but need to get activated outside of you. So it can either be done through another person, it can be done through a transit, etc. You can do it yourself, but you have to do it consciously. It's not automatic. But once it is activated, then it's beautiful. And I've got a lot of that in my chart. Even in my core framework, I've got, like on my design side, gate 30 is hanging. So it's not always 100% available to me. But getting back to your query, it really depends, because people are going to learn how to work with alignment first from an understanding of feeling good. But when it comes to working with the negative emotions, I mean, there is just as much, if not more, gold buried within those. And then they start to understand the process of transmutation and how that works. So it's really going to depend on the level of progress that the particular person is at.
Right, so you can't give beginners the advanced transmutation language yet. They're still learning to feel the difference between their own good feeling and someone else's amplified state. That has to come first. But here's the through line for the teaching. Early stage is learning to recognize your own signal through positive activation. Mid stage is learning to metabolize the intense stuff without losing coherence. Advanced stage is using that intensity as fuel for clarity itself. So when you're building the framework for the Elura collective, are you thinking about mapping it by those stages? Like what questions or practices land for someone at each level? Because how do I know if this is mine sounds very different depending on whether they're 6 months in or 3 years in.
So I want to just go back here. So in the beginning, it's not necessarily about just recognizing your own signal. It's just using, when you're feeling good, is using that energy, to to move forward. And like I said, you know, you may feel it, and someone who's starting off and they've never had any formal, you know, exposure, it's going to be a case where they just feel good and they just kind of go with it, and without any awareness of how they're designed to make decisions or anything like that. So it gets a lot more nuanced. So it's not quite that simple. But generally speaking, it's learning to the first and foremost thing is learning to recognize that it is safe to to take risks when you're on your own evolutionary journey, because the mind is going to constantly be interfering and trying to talk you out of doing things that you may feel excited about. But then so here's an example of using your signal. So you could be out with some friends and they talk about, oh yeah, we want to go out, we want to go to this event tomorrow night, and in the moment you get very excited. So without having any awareness of types or design specifics or anything like that, the next day comes and you're not so excited about going to the event, then that's a clear indication that going to that event is not necessarily in your fields. If that's something that occurs to you on a regular basis. So that's your design shining through and discerning and saying, well, it was exciting in the moment, but now that we've let that wave pass, it's not so much, and I'm actually craving like just staying in and watching a movie or doing something low key. So, so as you can see, this definitely gets a little bit more layered, and it's really just, so in the beginning, I really like to get people to just work with their signal, to feel it, and understand how the decisions that they make from an embodied place. Well, first of all, what an embodied decision means versus just a logic-based decision. What that actually means, what it actually feels like, what your signal actually feels like in your body, because so many people are so disconnected from any sort of feeling, because most people actually, they live in their head, and there's this incessant compulsive thinking that basically never stops. And so really the overall goal is to take awareness away from the incessant thinking and get the attention more into the body, which is the gateway into these higher planes of awareness.
Okay, so the entry point isn't to understand your design at all. It's feel the difference between excitement that lasts and excitement that evaporates. That's the lived signal. The body knows before the mind catches up. And most people are so trapped in compulsive thinking, they've never actually felt their own coherence versus borrowed energy. So the first gift activation is basically re-embodiment, getting people out of their heads and back into their actual felt sense, so they can even recognize what their signal feels like. Everything else builds from there. That's a much cleaner entry than drowning them in chart mechanics right away. You teach them to trust the body first, recognize the pattern second, and then the design language becomes the map for what they're already experiencing.
Well, so the distortion pattern can change, and it always changes depending on where you're building coherence. So that is an ongoing check-in point. But the practice of tuning in with the body becomes, like, for me now, it's almost like, it's constant, because I've just developed such an awareness of that. But again, for other people, it really depends on who we're working with. people that I typically seem to be drawn to are neurodivergents like myself, who are very sensitive to energy. And because of that, it's a lot easier for them to relate to things that I say. And, they're able to relate to the concepts that I present simply because, they have a similar design, and the way they process and intake information is very similar. So, it's certainly this process that I've created. It's far from a one size fits all, and that's why it works, and that's why it works so well. So just to recap, it's about developing a felt sense with the body first, and that's just feeling into your body and to feel the movement of energy within, all the different sensations, from the breath to tingling to itching to emotions themselves, like a twitching in the foot, but then the actual buzzing of the interoception of your being that's actually in your body, or the prana, or the chi, or whatever you want to call it, because that is really the gateway to getting back to the source. And when you develop a connection with the source directly, that's an absolute game changer, because now you're residing in a much higher level of awareness. Okay, I ran out of storage on my phone, so I just had to clear away a few things. So let's get back to it.
No worries. We were just wrapping up the foundational piece, developing that felt sense in the body first as the gateway to source connection, which then becomes the constant tuning fork for everything else. Ready when you are.
Yeah. So as I was saying, once and I mean, it's not like you do that like forever, but it is really the first piece of the puzzle. Many different traditions have different ways of doing things. Some focus on the thinking. Some focus on the, getting right into the energy centers. But I feel like it's important, especially in today's day and age, to really become connected to the body first, because it really addresses the aspect of inner peace. Because as you reclaim attention from the mind, and your constant, incessant, repetitive thinking that's usually thinking about nothing, it's not for most people, they're never even present when they're thinking that. So that's why I find it so important, because you start to build this relationship with your body, and then there's this level of trust, and these limiting beliefs then really start to they start to let go, and they start to release. And what winds up happening is, because energy is about movement, and the more that the energy moves in the body and through the field, the more coherence you have, and thus, for lack of a better term, raising your vibration, even though that is not scientifically correct. But we allow the vibration to vibrate at a higher rate, which means more coherence. So that's why I think it's foundationally the most important piece to really starting this process. And then people are gonna come into, they're gonna ask questions, or they're gonna be scared by the things that are going through their mind. And the reality is that all these things, they're just thoughts. They only have power if we give them power. Now, certain thoughts are just going to be floating through like little white clouds, and other thoughts are going to be much more connected to that bigger ball of energy, that negative energy that people are so used to living by, and especially when it gets activated. So it's eventually learning how to be able to sit in those with complete neutrality, and just let it pass. Because as we do that, whatever the experience was from our past, we're decreasing the energetic charge that enables it, and over time, we're just releasing vast amounts of life force, to start running coherently back through the system again. And as we do that, this is how our point of attraction changes.
For the sequence it is, reclaim.
It's not really a sequence. So I just want to be clear about that, because some people, the only step that they right. So no, I don't see it as a sequence, because a sequence would mean that there's a very specific amount of steps that need to happen in a very specific pattern. And the thing is that people's if you want to say the word sequence, people's activations are going to be very different from others. I mean, some people may not get any clarity at all for ages, and they just need to sit with the practice. I mean, at very least, it'll put them into a calm, neutral space, and then they'll be in an alpha state, and they'll be able to perceive things in general from a much more coherent manner. And then eventually they'll learn how to go into get into a theta state, which is a much deeper state of awareness. It's almost like being in a trance. So these are some of the things that are available when you engage in this practice. And I mean, if it's the only thing that you learn how to do, at the very least, you'll be learning how to reside in a state of coherent awareness, which means, and eventually learning to live in a state of inner peace. And the difference between inner peace and happiness is that basically happiness is dependent on conditions being perceived as positive, whereas inner peace, you could be in the depths of despair and totally broke, living on your buddy's couch, and still be totally okay with it. Being okay with it from the standpoint of, you're not deriving your sense of self, and you're not going through that wheel of self-deprecating punishment, which is what we seek to separate ourselves from, once we understand that our thoughts, like I said previously, are just like floating clouds, and they're not actually inherently truly who we are.
So the practice itself is the gift, not the clarity or the activation, but the capacity to reside in coherent awareness, regardless of external conditions. And that's what inner peace actually is. You're no longer hostage to the thought loop that says your worth depends on things being a certain way. That's the foundation that makes everything else possible. You can't activate deeper gifts if you're still drowning in the compulsive thinking that's tied to conditional happiness.
Well, yes and no. I mean, because inner peace is kind of like a baseline. And you just like a state of awareness, and it's not something, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up, is that it's not something that's outside of them or that they have to strive for. It's because it's available in every moment. You just have to tune into it, and by tuning into it, you tune into the body and you feel what's there, and that's why that's the whole point of doing this. Again, is for that reason, because once we've tuned in and we're aware of what's happening, then we're in a position to cultivate whatever it is we need to cultivate for a particular project that we're working on, or whatever it is that we're planning on doing, whatever it is we're trying to create. Like with me right now, I'm very single-minded about creating this project for the world. And that's why I'm doing videos like this. That's why I've built the website. That's why I've built the Elura wisdom tool, the interactive chat. I've got there's the one-on-one container, the sovereign design report that I was just messing around with, and I've got so many other things down the pipeline, down the road. And it's really just about being single-minded in whatever it is you're creating. But as part of that, as you start to work with your chart and work with your design and work with your energy, you start to realize what your preferences are, what your natural preferences are, and then you can stop doing all the shit that you were doing previously that didn't allow you to be in a state of alignment in the first place. We have a very specific design in which our energy is used and moves through our body and is expressed in a way that puts us in alignment with the flow of life. But because of the way